At 11:47 on a Sunday morning, with the choir filing out and the smell of lemon pound cake drifting in from the fellowship hall, a little boy grabbed my hand at church and asked me why I had changed my name. Before I take you any further into this, tell me something. Where are you right now? What city? And what time is it? Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's hearing this tonight. And stay with me on this one. This story has layers. The last layer was the one that made me sit in my own kitchen and look at my family Bible like it belonged to strangers. My name is Isaiah Monroe Carter. I am 62 years old, and for most of my life, I made my living in Baltimore reading the kind of paper most people pray they never have to understand. Wills, deeds, probate filings, trust disputes. I spent 32 years as an estate attorney, the last 11 of those years running Carter and Monroe on North Charles Street, before I sold my share and stepped back. I had done well enough to earn some rest, and old enough to know rest ain't something the world hands you. You protect it. I live in a brick colonial in Ashburton with a creaking back deck, 2 heavy magnolia trees, and a kitchen window that catches the morning light just right around 6:20. My wife, Deborah, passed 4 years before all this happened. Breast cancer. Quick at the end. Slow in what it leaves behind. These days, my daughter Adrienne calls me too early on weekdays and too late on weekends. My grandson Miles thinks my pancake recipe is classified information, and I keep a jar of coffee beans on the counter, like some men keep ammunition. Church had become part of the architecture of my peace. New Psalm Baptist on Reisterstown Road wasn't just where I worshipped. It was where people had watched me bury my mother, dedicate scholarship money in my wife's name, and keep my back straight through seasons that would have folded a weaker man. In places like that, people don't just know your face. They know your losses. They know how you take your coffee. They know whether your smile is real that morning. That Sunday had started normal enough. I wore a charcoal suit, a white shirt, and a burgundy tie, my daughter said, made me look like I charged by the hour even when I was off duty. I had parked 2 rows back because I like a clean exit, carried in a stainless steel travel mug with chicory coffee, and sat 3 pews from the front on the right side where the sunlight hit the wood in thin gold bands through the stained glass. I am not a loud man. Never have been. I have always believed a man who knows who he is doesn't need to announce it every few minutes. That morning I shook hands, hugged Sister Eloise, teased Brother Vernon about still owing me $20 from a raven's bed, and listened to a sermon about truth done in darkness, eventually asking for daylight. If I had been the superstitious type, I might have called that a warning. After service, people moved the way church people move when food is somewhere nearby. Slow in theory, fast in practice. Kids ran ahead. Older folks formed little circles in the aisle and told each other they weren't going to stay long while clearly settling in for another 30 minutes. Somebody had put out sweet tea, baked chicken, greens, and pound cake under aluminum foil in the fellowship hall, and the whole building smelled like polished wood, perfume, and Sunday dinner. I was near the coat rack outside the education wing when the boy came up to me. 7 years old, maybe. 8 at the oldest. Big brown eyes. Tiny navy blazer. 1 shoelace half open. He moved with that full-speed courage children have before the world teaches them to measure a room. He stopped right in front of me, looked up like he knew me, and said, clear as a bell, Grandpa, why did you change your name? Not Mister. Not Sir. Grandpa. For a second I thought he had the wrong man. Age will humble you in little ways, and one of them is learning not every strange moment is about you. I looked over my shoulder. Nobody there. Looked back down at him. He was still holding my hand. Say that again, I asked. He frowned the way children do when adults fail a simple test. Grandpa Ray said that used to be your name, he said. So why'd you change it? Then he said my full name, Isaiah Monroe Carter, not stumbling through it, not guessing. He said it the way you say something you've heard in the house more than once. Before I could ask another question, a voice cut across the hallway. Micah! That was Raymond Bell. At church, everybody called him Ray. Deacon Ray, if they liked titles. He was the church finance chair, ran most of the capital campaign meetings, wore pocket squares too bright for my taste, and had the polished kind of friendliness that looked expensive from a distance. Mid-60s maybe. Light brown skin, silver at the temples, always dressed like somebody might take his picture. He joined New Psalm around 15 years earlier and built himself into one of those men people start describing as indispensable because they confuse presence with trust. He crossed that hallway faster than I had ever seen him move. Micah let go of my hand and looked up at him. Not scared exactly. Corrected. Ray's smile landed on me first. Isaiah, I apologize, he said. Boy's imagination gets loose on Sundays. I didn't smile back. Does it? I said. Micah opened his mouth again, but a woman came up behind Ray and touched the boy's shoulder. I knew her by face, not by life. Taryn Bell, Ray's daughter-in-law. Quiet woman. Always sat near the rear with her son. Pretty in a tired way, if you know what I mean. The kind of tired that doesn't come from one bad night. It comes from carrying a whole house's weather alone. Come on, Micah, she said softly. The boy looked from her to me. But Grandpa said, come on, she said again, and this time he went. Ray gave a little laugh. You know how kids are, he said. I let a beat pass before I answered. Silence can do work words can't. I know exactly how kids are, I said. That's why I pay attention when they say something adults don't want repeated. That smile of his didn't disappear. It tightened. Old family stories get mixed up, he said, especially around church folk. Then he clapped my shoulder like we were still in ordinary time and walked away with them. Now, if you've lived long enough, you know children don't invent structure. They invent dragons. They invent space cowboys and basement monsters and dogs that talk. But they do not invent the calm confidence of a sentence they've heard from grown folks at home. That kind of sentence belongs to an origin point. Still, I tried to be fair. Maybe Micah had been looking at an old photo wall. Maybe he'd overheard some story about a cousin. Maybe Ray had meant somebody else, and the boy tangled it up in his head. I'm not a man who likes reaching for suspicion before facts. Suspicion alone can turn you into the kind of fool who mistakes motion for truth. But then, one small detail kept bothering me. He had said my middle name. Plenty of people at church knew me as Isaiah Carter. Some knew enough to call me Brother Carter. A handful of old friends and legal people used my full name on paper. But that child said Isaiah Monroe Carter, like it had been spoken in his hearing enough times to settle naturally in his mouth. That wasn't nothing. I carried a plate I no longer wanted into the fellowship hall and took a seat at the corner table under the bulletin board. The room was all noise. Forks tapping phone plates. Women laughing from the kitchen passed through. Somebody arguing about the Orioles. Yet I felt separate from it, like the sound had moved one room away from me. My friend Harold Sims dropped into the chair beside me with collard greens and cornbread stacked like a small engineering feat. You look like that sermon offended your ancestors, he said. I gave him half a smile. Harold and I had known each other since Morgan State. He was one of the few people who could make me laugh on a bad day without performing for it. Kid said something strange to me, I said. Harold chewed, swallowed, then leaned in. What kind of strange? The kind that makes a man wish he had heard it wrong. He waited. A little boy asked me why I changed my name. Harold blinked once. At church? At church. He set his fork down. That's not church strange. That's courthouse strange. That's why Harold had been in my life so long. He knew the difference. Across the room, I spotted Ray by the beverage station, talking to Pastor Givens and two members of the building committee. Normal posture, easy laugh, one hand in his pocket. The sort of man who understood visibility as strategy. Taryn stood further back near the dessert table with Micah, and even from a distance I could see she wasn't comfortable. She kept one hand on that boy's shoulder the whole time, like she was afraid truth might come out of him physically if she let go. I told myself to let the day finish before I made it bigger than it was. That lasted maybe 9 minutes. I was on my way toward the side exit when I felt something brush my sleeve. Micah again. He had approached me from the back like a little spy with poor training. He held out a folded church bulletin, eyes wide, then darted a glance down the hallway. My grandpa said, "Don't touch his blue box," he whispered. "But I saw your picture." Before I could answer, he pressed the bulletin into my hand and ran back toward the restrooms. I didn't open it there. I took it to my car. I drive a black Lexus Ease I keep too clean because there are some parts of life a man ought to still control. I got in, shut the door, turned the key just far enough for air, and unfolded the bulletin on the passenger seat. Inside was a photograph. Not a copy, not a program insert, an actual old photograph. Glossy edges worn soft with age. Slight crease near one corner. In it was a younger version of me, maybe 19, standing on the front steps of my mother's row house on North Monroe Street in a tan members-only jacket, grinning with more carelessness in my face than adulthood ever let me keep. Beside me was my father, Elijah Carter, one hand on my shoulder, looking proud in the quiet way black men of his generation often did. He had on his postal service jacket. The address number was visible behind us. That photo had never been public. Never. It had not been used in my mother's funeral program. Not in Deborah's memorial slideshow. Not in a church anniversary booklet. It lived for decades in a cedar box my mother kept wrapped in one of her old scarves. Then later in a locked lower drawer of my study after she passed. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in blue ink that wasn't old enough to belong to my mother, were the words, "Original name file." No signature. No explanation. Just that. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and the photograph in my lap, and I felt something in my chest pull tight. Not panic. I don't spook easy. It felt more like the old courtroom instinct I used to get when a witness answered too smoothly. That inner shift where your body knows before your theory catches up. When a man starts reaching for your name, he's not after letters. He's after your place in the world. I put the photo back in the bulletin and drove home without turning on the radio. My house was quiet when I got there. Quiet in the full way, not the peaceful way. I set the photo on my kitchen island, loosened my tie, and stood at the sink staring out toward the backyard where one of the magnolia blossoms had dropped early and gone brown around the edges. I poured myself fresh coffee, even though it was past noon. Some people drink to avoid clarity. I drink coffee to meet it head on. I checked the study drawer. The cedar scarf box was there, locked. Nothing looked disturbed. I opened it anyway. Old school records, my mother's wedding photo, my father's union card, a yellowed Morgan State acceptance letter, 3 church fans from funerals we'd all promised to remember. The stack seemed untouched, but one space in the back left corner was emptier than I remembered. The absence was small, specific, a gap where 2 or 3 photographs had once rested. Now, memory can play tricks when grief has handled a box before you, so I didn't rush to certainty. I told myself maybe I had moved them years back. Maybe Adrienne had borrowed something for a family collage. Maybe that photo had been copied long ago without my knowing. I called my daughter anyway. "Maybe," I said, when she answered, "You ever go through the cedar box in my study and take any old family photos?" No, she said. Why? What happened? Nothing yet. She heard the word yet. That girl got her mother's emotional ear and my legal one. Dad, what is going on? I'll tell you if it becomes something. She was quiet for a moment. That means it's already something. I smiled in spite of myself. You sound just like your mother. I hope so. After we hung up, I carried the photo into the den and sat with it under better light. My father's face in that image bothered me almost as much as my own, because theft hits different when it doesn't stop with you. When somebody reaches backward through your name and starts touching the dead, that's a different kind of trespass. I decided not to call Ray that evening. A rushed confrontation helps liars more than it helps honest men. Liars rehearse. Truth remembers. If I was going to step into this, I wanted to do it with both shoes tied. Monday morning, I drove downtown and parked near the Clarence M. Mitchell Jr. Courthouse. Old habits. There's something about legal buildings before 9 a.m. that still makes sense to me. Too much glass. Too many people pretending paper is less dangerous than it is. I stopped first at Carter and Monroe, mostly because I still had a key and because my former junior partner, Alicia Monroe, remained one of the smartest property lawyers I knew. Not family despite the shared last name. Just competent, which in this world is often better. She looked up when I stepped into her office. Well, she said, either you've missed me terribly or something smells bad. Both can be true, I said. I showed her the photograph. Alicia's eyes narrowed. Where'd you get this? A boy at church. His grandfather is Raymond Bell. She flipped the photo over and read the words on the back. Original name file. She repeated. That is not old handwriting. I know. Who has access to your family records? Less people than should make this possible. She set the photo down. What exactly are you worried about? I answered without thinking long. Identity theft. Title fraud. Estate positioning. Maybe all three. Alicia didn't flinch because she had seen versions of ugly before. Then, don't start with him, she said. Start with your paper shadow. That was the right phrase. Your paper shadow. The version of you the system believes even when you're asleep. We pulled my name through Maryland judiciary case search first. Nothing criminal. Nothing shocking. Then civil. A handful of old probate matters. Routine things. Then Alicia paused. There, she said. A petition filed 12 days earlier in Baltimore City Circuit Court. Case type. Quiet title/declaratory relief. Property. 1718 North Monroe Street. My mother's house? Petitioner. Raymond Elijah Bell. Additional claimant language. Also known in family records as I am Carter. For one full second, I just looked at the screen. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I understood it immediately. Ray was not just carrying my photograph around in some secret box like a sentimental fool. He was building paper around my name. He was trying to turn private family confusion into public legal ambiguity. And ambiguity is where theft puts on a suit. Alicia opened the docket details. Attached affidavits had been filed. One witness statement. One genealogical summary. One claim alleging inconsistent naming across generations due to informal domestic guardianship and undocumented family transition. That is the kind of language crooks love. Dense enough to sound official. Foggy enough to hide a knife in. Can we pull the filings? I asked. We can, and we will. We got the first set before lunch. I had to read that petition twice, not because it was complex, but because rage kept trying to interrupt my eyesight. Ray Bell was claiming that old family papers reflected a name shift linking him to my mother's line. He wasn't claiming to be me in the obvious way a fool would. He was doing something slicker. He was planning enough overlap, to argue shared heirship through corrected identity lineage. It was built to confuse a tired clerk, pressure a lazy judge, or manipulate a settlement-minded institution. And because the property had appreciated with all the redevelopment creeping through West Baltimore, the timing made ugly sense. Then I saw the witness affidavit, Renee Carter James. My first cousin, my blood. I leaned back in the chair so slowly it scared Alicia. "You know her?" she asked. "Know her," I said. I learned how to ride a bike in her mother's driveway. Renee and I were 2 months apart in age. Grew up moving in and out of each other's houses like cousins do when the family web is tight and money isn't always. She had been at my wedding. I had paid part of her son's tuition at Bowie State when she hit a rough patch and never mentioned it again. She worked part-time in the church office some years back, then later did record support for a funeral home in Randallstown, which meant 2 things at once. She understood documents, and she understood death. Her affidavit stated that family elders had long acknowledged confusion regarding the original Carter Bell naming sequence, and that Raymond E. Bell had been privately recognized within the family line, though not publicly disclosed. Lie doesn't need volume. It just needs enough silence around it. I didn't say much for a while. Alicia let me sit there, then asked the only useful question. Who else would have given him access? I thought about the cedar box, my study, my mother's papers, the few times anyone had been in the house while I wasn't. Then it hit me. 2 summers earlier, after my knee replacement, I had spent 3 nights at Sinai recovering before physical therapy started. Adrienne had handled most things, but Renee had offered to stop by the house, water the plants, bring in mail, and pull a navy suit from the closet before a memorial service I planned to attend that weekend. At the time, it felt like family doing what family does. Now it felt like a key turning in a lock I had forgotten was there. I went home that afternoon and did something I didn't enjoy. I replayed old memories with new lighting. Renee asking, just a little too casually, whether I had ever changed any deed language after my mother's death. Ray once volunteering to help organize legacy paperwork for the church scholarship committee, then lingering in my study doorway when he dropped off raffle tickets. Renee pressing me last Thanksgiving about whether I plan to keep the Monroe Street property or sell before taxes get. Foolish. Ray joking 3 months earlier that a name is just paperwork, with a suit on. At the time I had answered, only fools think that. He had smiled too long. There is a kind of nausea that comes not from discovering something new, but from realizing the evidence had been living beside you in plain clothes. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, long after the coffee went cold. No television, no music. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock above the pantry. I laid out the photograph, the court filing, and a notepad. Around 1:13 a.m., I found myself staring at my father's face in that photo again. He had grown up in a world where black people's names got bent, misspelled, and stripped by systems that never felt obligated to get us right. Men like Ray prey on that history. They treat old injury like opportunity. They crawl into the cracks left by neglect and call it business. I put both palms flat on the table and closed my eyes. For the first time since Micah spoke to me, I wondered whether I had the energy for what this would require. Not the intelligence, not the strategy. The energy, because exposing strangers is work. Exposing your own blood is grief with paperwork attached. I considered walking into court, filing my response, and leaving the rest to lawyers. That would have protected the house, but not the truth. And if Ray had built enough nerve to reach for my mother's property using my own cousin's voice, then the Monroe Street house was probably not the beginning of this thing. It was just the piece that touched me directly. By Tuesday morning, I had my second confirmation. It came from Bernice Holloway, our church's longtime record secretary, a woman in her 70s who had forgotten more about New Psalm than than most pastors ever knew. I asked if I could see her at the office. She still kept a jar of butterscotch candies on her desk and wore reading glasses on a gold chain like a woman who had earned the right to look over them at people. I didn't waste her time. Did Raymond Bell ever ask for copies of my records? I said. She didn't answer immediately. That told me enough. Isaiah, she said, lowering her voice. I didn't think it was improper at the time. He said you had authorized him to help with donor history documents. There was some issue with the Scholarship Trust and the Anniversary Archive. What did he ask for? She opened a drawer and pulled out a request log. Membership profile copy. Baptism record. My mother's funeral program archive scan. A 2019 donor biography. And this one made my stomach go cold. A photocopy of my driver's license from a reimbursement packet after a church legal workshop trip to Annapolis. I looked up at her. Who gave him that? You did, she said. Not personally. It was attached to a file for mileage reporting. He said he was consolidating finance records. That wasn't all. Bernice also remembered. Renee coming in after hours on a Saturday, 2 months earlier, to help sort family history materials for church homecoming. She had signed the guest log, using the side office key code she still shouldn't have had. On my way out, Bernice touched my hand. I need to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. Am I in trouble? I shook my head. No, but don't mention this conversation to anybody. Especially not Ray. Especially not Renee. Her face changed then. Less fear, more hurt. That bad? Worse, I said. I should tell you something here, because some of you hearing this know exactly what I mean. When family betrayal first shows itself, it rarely arrives looking violent. It comes dressed as access, as help, as familiarity. As I was just trying to handle it for you. And because the voice is known, people let the key turn. By then I had enough to know the problem was real, but not enough to see the full shape. So I went where shape lives, records. I spent the rest of Tuesday with Alicia pulling every publicly available thread we could find on Raybell, corporate entities, old property filings, UCC records, campaign donations, nonprofit registrations. It was the kind of work that rewards patience more than brilliance. By late afternoon, a pattern emerged. Raymond Elijah Bell had served on boards, chaired committees, and attached himself to churches in Baltimore, Prince George's County, and once in Northeast D.C. across nearly 20 years. That by itself meant nothing. Community men often circulate. But attached to 2 of those locations were quiet property transfers connected to elderly decedents whose estates had been informally resolved outside contested probate after affidavits of kinship appeared. One affidavit had been notarized by the same attorney now listed on Ray's petition, Lowell Spinks. There was my external accomplice. Spinks had a small office near Greenmount Avenue, presented himself as a neighborhood fixer, and specialized in streamlined family property resolution, which is the sort of phrase that sounds helpful until you notice it tends to appear wherever older black families are tired, undocumented, grieving, or trusting. I had seen men like him before. They thrive in the overlap between legal truth and practical exhaustion. Alicia found another filing from 6 years earlier where Ray served as informal family representative in the disposition of a vacant property belonging to a woman from Lanham who died without children. The paperwork never alleged fraud, but the house had landed in an LLC tied to one of Spinks's former clients, then sold 8 months later for 3 times the value. So he wasn't just trying to make money off confusion, Alicia said quietly. He was hunting it. Predator. That was the word that came to mind. Not hustler. Not opportunist. Predator. I drove home through Druid Hill with the windows cracked, letting the late-day air hit my face. I passed people walking dogs, a teenager on a dirt bike rolling too fast past the park edge, Two old men playing chess outside a rec center. Life going on like it always does while your own roofline shifts. At the house, I found an envelope in my mail slot with no stamp. Inside was a folded sheet torn from a child's composition notebook. Mr. Carter, I am sorry. Micah should not have said that. Please do not ask him anything else. He does not understand what he heard. TB no address. No number. No signature beyond initials. Taryn. That changed my next move. I didn't call her. People who hand-deliver fear deserve gentleness. I waited until Wednesday after Bible study and approached her in the church parking lot near the far row where the lights don't hit as bright. She had Micah by the hand and looked like she already knew I would come. I got your note, I said. She looked around before answering. I shouldn't have sent it, but you did. She nodded once. I'm not here to harm your family, I said, but your father-in-law is using my name in court. So whatever this is, it has already left private territory. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. Can we not do this here? We met the next morning at a coffee shop on Liberty Heights, one of those places trying very hard to look gentle with reclaimed wood and chalkboard menus. Taryn sat across from me in a denim jacket, both hands around a cup she barely touched. She had the posture of somebody who had spent a long time shrinking herself to fit other people's damage. I didn't know what he was doing at first, she said. Start where you did know. She took a breath. Micah got into a locked file box in the basement about a month ago. Blue metal box. My father-in-law keeps everything in there. Papers, old photos, IDs. He came upstairs holding your picture and asking who the man was. Ray snatched it away and laughed. Said it was him when he was younger. Said families change names all the time, and some things had to be fixed on paper. I didn't interrupt. A few days later I asked about it. She continued. He told me it was legal business and none of mine. But I went back when he was out one afternoon. I found more. Copies of deeds, church records, a driver's license photo that looked like it had been cut and reworked, your name on folders, your mother's house address, and paperwork with my aunt by marriage, Renee, talking about what she remembered from the family story. There it was, spoken aloud. You took anything? I asked. Her hand went into her purse. She slid a flash drive across the table. I used my phone and photographed what I could. I looked at the drive and then at her. Why help me? Her answer came without drama, which is how truth usually sounds. Because my son came home thinking lies were inheritance. That landed hard. She kept going. Ray has been telling us for 2 years that a family property matter was going to change all our lives. Said he was correcting history. Said some people had been living off a name that wasn't purely theirs. He made it sound righteous. Then I saw your face in those files. I started asking questions. He told my husband I was being disrespectful. My husband told me to stay out of church business. You trust your husband in this? Her eyes dropped to the table. Not fully. That was answer enough. On the flash drive were 37 photographs. Folders labeled IMC. A partial fake identification card using my name and a different address. Scanned copies of my church donor bio. A photograph of my mother's signature from an old insurance form. Draft affidavits. A spreadsheet listing older church members with columns for surviving children, property status, and paper quality. Paper quality. I had to put the drive down and walk to the window before I said something unhelpful. When I came back, Taryn had tears in her eyes, but hadn't let them fall. There was one more thing, she said. He told Micah not to tell anybody about the blue box, because grown folks don't understand family correction work. I let out a breath through my nose. Family correction. He says things like that when he wants ugly to sound educated. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. because the accuracy was cruel. I thanked her and asked one last question. Did he ever say who was helping him besides Renee? She nodded. A lawyer, Lowell, and somebody at church who could get files. That put Renee in both categories at once, blood and access. Painful efficiency. By that evening, the whole picture finally assembled. Ray Bell and Renee Carter James had been building a false kinship narrative around my mother's line, using old family gaps, church records, copy identification, and genealogical language muddy enough to survive first review. Attorney Lowell Spinks was filing the legal shell. The immediate target was the Monroe Street property. But inside the photographs Tarn gave me were notes referencing another asset I hadn't thought about in years. A dormant compensation fund created after a city settlement tied to a block condemnation fight from the 1980s. Money that had never been fully dispersed because ownership questions among surviving heirs were left unresolved. That meant the house wasn't the endgame. My name was. If they could attach enough confusion to it, they could pressure institutions handling old family assets, perhaps even argue administrative control where records were incomplete. And because I was alive, educated, and known, they needed a softer strategy than simple impersonation. They had to turn the story into a lineage fog where I became just one disputed branch instead of the clear line. I called Aunt Odessa that night. My father's older sister, 84, lives in Randallstown. Walks slow, mind still sharp enough to shave with. She told me to come by and bring decent peaches, not them hard ones from the grocery store pretending to be fruit. I arrived with peaches and a legal pad. Her house smelled like starch, furniture polish, and old hymns. She listened without interrupting while I laid out the whole thing. Photo, petition, Renee, Ray, Tarn, Lowell Spinks. When I finished, she sat back and rubbed the ring finger where her wedding band used to be. I knew that Bellboy was studying us too closely, she said. Bellboy? I asked. You remember Lenora Bell. Worked part-time around Mount Clair years ago. Had herself a child and always hinted she belonged closer to the family than she did. That child was Raymond. I stared at her. You telling me Ray grew up around us? Not inside us, around us, Aunt Odessa said. His mother claimed his daddy was Nathaniel Carter's cousin from the Eastern Shore side. Maybe true, maybe not. But she used the Carter name when it suited her and dropped it when it didn't. Folks let it slide because everybody was tired and half the men in those years were dodging one thing or another. That mattered, not because it proved Ray's claim, because it gave him just enough ancestral smoke to sell fire to people who wanted simple stories. Did anybody ever privately recognize him as family? I asked. Aunt Odessa cut her eyes at me. Child, people recognize all kinds of things privately. That don't make them legal or true. Lenora hung around funerals and repasts, collecting names like recipes. She was always asking who owned what. Your mama never trusted her. Did Renee know this? Oh, Renee knows every rumor that ever passed through this family. Girl used to sit still as a lamp and hear everything. I wrote nothing down for a moment. Just let that settle. Then Aunt Odessa gave me the piece I didn't know I was missing. Check the funeral home files from your mother and from Bernice Carter before that, she said. Renee helped with both. If photographs went walking, that's where feet started. I looked up. You sure? She gave me that old woman expression reserved for people asking unnecessary questions. Isaiah, at my age, I don't use certainty for decoration. So I checked. Renee had indeed accessed the preparation files for my mother's service and for my great-aunt, Bernice's homegoing 2 years earlier through her work at the funeral home. Both files contained family history sheets and scanned photographs submitted for memorial boards. That was the bridge. She had seen what existed. Ray had later taken what was useful. The church archives gave him reinforcement. My study gave him originals. Spinks gave him legal language, a matryoshka of evidence. Every small, ugly thing opening into a bigger one. By Friday, Alicia and I had assembled a file thick enough to stop a truck. Certified court copies, the church request log, security footage from the church side entrance showing Renee entering the records office on the Saturday Bernice mentioned, metadata from Tarn's photographs establishing date and device capture, corporate records connecting Ray to prior suspect property resolutions, a draft motion to intervene and seek sanctions. And one more thing. A recorded statement from Tarn, given voluntarily, describing the blue box, the lies told to Micah, and the documents she saw. I did not rush to police. Not yet. This was one of those situations where law would matter, but timing would matter first. If Ray got a hint that the wall had closed in, he would destroy paper, reposition all eyes, and possibly blame Tarn. Men like that don't just lie. They reassign risk. So I decided to let him walk into light, believing it was his idea. The church happened to give me the perfect room. Every September, New Psalm hosted a legacy stewardship meeting for major donors, trustees, finance officers, and certain committee leads. Half celebration, half paperwork, very church, very respectable. Missouri respectable. Pastor Givens would pray. Bernice would pass packets. Ray would usually speak on transparency and vision, and people would nod while pretending budgets were spiritual gifts. I asked Pastor Givens if I could add a short legal review segment on donor-protected assets and historic property obligations, given recent growth plans. He loved the idea. Ray loved it more. He called me himself that Saturday afternoon. "Isaiah, man, that'd be a blessing," he said. "Church needs somebody with your background to help us keep things clean." I sat on my back deck with a cup of coffee and watched a squirrel move along the fence like he paid taxes here. "Happy to help," I said. "Good. We all want to honor legacy the right way. There are moments when a liar says a word so perfectly chosen it almost deserves applause. Legacy. I told him I'd prepare something thorough. After we hung up, I stayed outside a long time. Late sun across the yard. Neighborhood kids laughing somewhere down the block. A siren far off. The ordinary sounds of a city carrying on while I planned the hardest room I'd entered in years. And right there, let me say this to you. If you've ever had somebody use closeness as camouflage, then you know the strangest part is not the anger. It's the disappointment in how patiently they watched you before they made their move. Put that in the comments if you've lived it. I mean that. Some of y'all know this row better than you ever wanted to. I also need to say one other thing. A lot of these stories take time to pull apart, and time costs something. If you support this channel and want to help me keep telling them, there's a link in the description and one in the comments. No pressure. Truly. Just know I appreciate every person who decides to stand behind this work, because telling the truth carefully takes more than emotion. It takes endurance. Now let me get back to what I did next. I spent Sunday evening at my dining table building the packet Ray Bell thought would flatter him. First page, ordinary agenda. Second page, donor stewardship overview. Third page, heritage property discussion. Fourth page, copies of the quiet title filing. Fifth page, Renee's affidavit. Sixth page, the church request log. Seventh page, still images from the side entrance footage. Eighth page, the spreadsheet titled Paper Quality. The last page was the photograph Micah handed me, front and back. I made 14 copies. Some men prepare for confrontation by practicing speeches. I prepare by reducing the room available for denial. Harold came by that night with Chinese takeout and sat at the counter while I organized tabs. He picked up the fake ID photograph from Tarn's file and whistled low. So this fool really thought he could wear you like a jacket. Not wear me. I said. "Blimey," Harold nodded. "That's colder." It was. He leaned against the counter, eyes on the stack. "You good for this?" "No." He waited. I straightened the pages and looked at the packet in front of me. "But ready and good are different things." He smiled at that. "That's a lie. It's a fact." Before he left, he put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. No speech. Men our age understand the value of concise loyalty. That night, I slept maybe 3 hours. Not because I doubted the evidence. Because evidence doesn't soften betrayal. It sharpens it. Monday morning came gray and damp. Rain threatening but not yet committed. I dressed with more care than vanity. Dark navy suit. White pocket square. Silver watch Deborah gave me on our 20th anniversary. The same burgundy tie from the Sunday Micah first spoke to me. Some things deserve symmetry. I stood in my kitchen with my coffee and looked at my reflection in the microwave door. Eyes steady, mouth set, not angry looking, not broken looking either, just finished with confusion. There is dignity in that stage of a thing. By 8:10, I was parked at the church. Bernice was already inside setting folders near the fellowship room podium. Pastor Givens arrived at 8:22 with his usual leather briefcase and more optimism than the morning deserved. Alicia came at 8:31 carrying her own file. Harold was there by 8:35 under the harmless pretense of helping with stewardship outreach. Taryn did not enter through the front. I had arranged for her to wait in Pastor's office until I called for her. At 8:44, Ray Bell stepped through the side doors in a camel overcoat, umbrella tucked under one arm, smiling like a man who believed the room was still his. Renee came behind him. She saw me, lifted a hand and said, "Morning, cousin," like the word had not already been pawned. I looked at her for a second too long. "Morning," I said. She glanced at the packets on the table. "Looks official." "It is," I said. Ray rubbed his hands together and looked around the room. "Good turnout?" This is exactly the kind of meeting that protects a church. I almost answered him right there, almost. But patience is not passivity. It is sequencing, so I held my peace. Let him take his seat. Let him joke with Bernice. Let Renee smooth her skirt and check her phone. Let Pastor Givens open in prayer. Let 3 committee members talk through line items they would not remember by dinner. Let the room believe it was still an ordinary Monday stewardship meeting. Because truth does not always need a dramatic entrance. Sometimes it works best when the liar is fully seated. When Pastor Givens finished praying, the room answered amen and slid back into the ordinary sounds of paper moving, chairs adjusting, and coffee being poured into thin church cups that never hold enough. Rain tapped once against the fellowship hall windows, then stopped like it had changed its mind. Ray sat 2 seats to the pastor's left, with his reading glasses low on his nose and his folder open, already wearing the face of a man prepared to explain stewardship to everybody else. Pastor began with building updates. Roof repair on the education wing. Scholarship dinner numbers from August. A short mention of a landscaping bid that had somehow become a 20-minute discussion because churches, like families, can turn any simple decision into a referendum on memory. I let it breathe. Let the room settle into rhythm. Let Ray relax into the assumption that he understood the script better than I did. When my turn came, Pastor smiled toward me and said, "Brother Carter has kindly agreed to walk us through some legacy protection principles this morning. As we grow, we need wise eyes." I stood, buttoned my jacket, picked up my folder, and walked to the front without hurry. There is power in not looking rushed. I thanked Pastor, looked around the room, and let my eyes rest on every face long enough to be human. Bernice near the side table. Alicia 2 chairs back with her legal pad. Harold by the wall, pretending to be interested in the thermostat. Renee with her purse folded tight in her lap. And Ray, smooth as ever, ready to nod at whatever sounded respectable. I set the first packet in front of me and said, "Before I start on donor records and property stewardship, I need to ask one question." No one moved. I turned to Ray. "Why did you tell your grandson I changed my name?" The room didn't explode. Real shock rarely does. It narrows. It concentrates. You could hear a coffee spoon hit a saucer 3 tables away in the kitchen. Ray gave a small laugh first, because men like him always test laughter before they test truth. "Isaiah, I think this is neither the time nor place for a misunderstanding involving a child. I didn't ask you about time or place," I said. I asked why you told him that. He leaned back in his chair and folded one hand over the other. "I told no such thing. Children mishear. You know that." Pastor looked from him to me. "Is there something we should understand here?" "Yes," I said. "But I would prefer to build it carefully." I reached into my folder and placed the old photograph on the table in front of Pastor Givens, then handed copies down both sides of the room. It took a few seconds for everyone to realize what they were looking at. A teenage version of me. My father beside me. The front steps on North Monroe Street. The back of the copy carried the words "Original Name File." "This photograph was taken from a private family collection in my home," I said. On Sunday, Ray Bell's grandson handed it to me at church. The boy said he had seen my picture in his grandfather's blue box. Ray's smile didn't vanish. It hardened around the edges. "That proves nothing except that somebody misplaced an old photograph. It proves you had one you had no lawful reason to possess." Renee shifted in her chair. Ray lifted both palms like he was indulging a sad confusion. "Isaiah, old family pictures circulate. I don't know how many times we've all shared memory boxes around this church. If the child found a duplicate, I can't account for every stray item from every generation." I nodded once. A duplicate would be an argument if this picture had ever been duplicated. It had not. Alicia slid a second set of packets down the table at my signal. "Look at page 2, I said. Pages turned. I watched the exact moment the room found the court header. Baltimore City Circuit Court. Quiet title and declaratory relief. 12 days earlier. Property address on North Monroe Street. Petitioner Raymond Elijah Bell. Language claiming linkage through alias and corrected lineage. The kind of filing that sounds dusty until you realize somebody is trying to put a crowbar into your dead mother's front door. Pastor Givens looked up first. "Raymond, what is this?" Ray took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man burdened by other people's lack of sophistication. "A legal housekeeping matter," he said. "There are old family ambiguities in West Baltimore all the time. I was advised to clarify a record issue before taxes and title complications created bigger problems for everyone." "For everyone?" I repeated. "Meaning who?" "For the extended family." "What extended family?" Ray spread a hand toward the packets. "Isaiah, you and I both know old black family records are not always neat. Names get shifted. Children get raised by other branches. Men disappear. Women protect what they can. You, of all people, should know the system doesn't always tell our story correctly. There are dangerous men who tell lies with contempt. Ray was worse than that. He told them with borrowed history. I looked at the room and then back at him. You're right about one thing. The system has mishandled our names for generations. That is exactly why what you're doing is so foul. You are using old damage as camouflage for new theft." His jaw tightened. Renee finally spoke. "Nobody is stealing anything. Some family matters are more complicated than you like to admit." I turned to her. "Then I'm glad you're here." More pages slid across the table. Page 3 was her affidavit. I watched her face drain a little when she saw her own signature enlarged and clean against the white paper. Pastor's voice went low. "Renee, She straightened in her chair. I signed what I believed. There were things said in this family for years. Things about who belonged where and what was never corrected. By whom? I asked. She hesitated. There it was. The first useful silence of the morning. By elders. She said at last. Name one. She looked at Ray. That told everybody what I needed it to tell them. Name one, I said again. She swallowed. People are dead, Isaiah. Not everything came with paperwork. That's true, I said. But lies usually do. Bernice whispered, "Oh Lord," under her breath, not trying hard enough for it to count as private. Ray leaned forward. Now hold on. You're turning a delicate family matter into theater. If there are disputed understandings, the court exists to sort them out. I picked up one of the packets and tapped page 4. The court also appreciates knowing when its petitioners obtained church records under false pretenses. That got the room all the way still. Page 4 contained the request log from Bernice's office, my donor biography, my mother's funeral archive, my baptism record, a photocopy of my driver's license from an old reimbursement file, dates, initials, request entries, all of it logged under Ray's name. Pastor turned to Bernice. Sister Holloway, are these copies of your records? Bernice nodded slowly. Yes. Did you authorize this? She looked shattered. He told me Brother Carter wanted assistance with archive reconciliation and scholarship trust paperwork. I believed him. Ray cut in fast. That is an outrageous framing. I never said anything improper. We were organizing donor files. I answered before anyone else could. No, you were harvesting identifiers. He laughed again, but this time it was thin. You make it sound criminal because you're embarrassed there may be family facts you don't control. I let him keep talking. One lesson from trial work. A liar under pressure often answers the accusation he fears most, not the one you actually made. All you have to do is give him room. So I did. Ray adjusted his cuff and looked around the table for all eyes. I have spent 15 years helping this church manage its resources. I have protected widows from bad contracts, kept this building afloat during ugly seasons, and carried responsibilities half the people in this room ran from. But now, because Isaiah feels blindsided by old lineage questions, suddenly I'm some kind of criminal mastermind. That was minimization sliding toward victimhood. Pastor looked uneasy. Committee members exchanged glances. Nobody wanted to be the first one to say the word fraud in a church fellowship hall before lunch, so I supplied the next layer. Page 5, I said. That page carried security stills from the side office entrance. Date stamp. Time stamp. Renee entering on a Saturday she had no business being there, using an access code tied to old church office privileges that should have been disabled. A second image showed her leaving with a file box tucked under one arm beneath a cardigan. Renee stared at the image of herself like she was seeing a ghost caught doing clerical work. I was helping with homecoming archives, she said quickly, on a closed office Saturday with donor files. Bernice knew I still assisted sometimes. Bernice shook her head at once. Not with that key code, not with those files. Renee's voice sharpened. You don't remember everything, Bernice. At that point, Alicia stood. She didn't need my introduction. Her competence carried itself. My name is Alicia Monroe, she said, calm and precise. I practiced estate and property law with Isaiah Monroe Carter for 11 years. I have reviewed the court petition at issue, the attached affidavit, the church record log, the imagery of file access, and related public filings connected to Mr. Bell. In my professional opinion, this is not a simple family misunderstanding. It is a coordinated attempt to create documentary ambiguity around asset ownership. Ray turned to her with a dismissive smile. Unnaturally, you would say that. You're his friend. No, Alicia said. I'm his former partner. My friendship is not the strongest part of my opinion. A couple people near the back almost smiled at that. I handed Pastor the next document myself. This is a draft motion we are prepared to file, I said. It includes a request for sanctions, forensic review of submitted exhibits, and notice to relevant agencies regarding identity misuse and fraudulent property representations. Ray's fingers curled against the table, then flattened. First physical crack. He looked at me and dropped a church voice entirely. You came in here loaded for war. No, I said. I came in here loaded for daylight. Renee stood halfway from her chair. You act like you own truth because you were always the polished one. Always the one with the degree, the clients, the nice house. Maybe some of us got tired of family stories being told only by the branch that had money to print the programs. That one hurt because pain and greed had braided together in it. Human beings are rarely made of one clean motive. I helped your son get through Bowie, I said quietly. Not because I wanted control, because we were family. Her eyes flashed. And maybe I got tired of feeling like charity from you was the only inheritance I was supposed to touch. There it was. Not justification, but source. A room can survive anger better than envy. Envy stains every memory it passes through. Ray sees the opening. This is exactly my point. Old hurts, old secrets, old imbalances. You cannot reduce all that to some sinister plot. I slid one final page toward Pastor. The spreadsheet. Columns titled Surviving Children, Property Status, Probate Open, Church Ties, Paper Quality. Pastor's mouth actually opened. Harold, from the wall, said what everybody else was thinking. Paper quality. Ray snapped his head toward him. You don't know what you're looking at. I know enough, Harold said. I faced the room. This document was photographed from Mr. Bell's private file box by a family member in his household. It lists older church-connected individuals and assesses how easy their records might be to manipulate. That is what paper quality means. Ray stood then, fast, chair scraping hard across the tile. You brought somebody from my household into this. There it was, not denial. Ownership of the battlefield slipping. Pastor rose more slowly. Sit down, Raymond. But Ray wasn't looking at Pastor. He was looking at me. You think you're the first man to realize the law is built on weak paper. You think those courts care about our truth. I did what men do when systems leave money buried in confusion. I corrected leverage. A sentence like that will tell on a man better than 10 witnesses. I said nothing. Silence leaned on him. He kept going. That house on Monroe was sitting half dead in family nostalgia. The city settlement fund was frozen because your people never cleaned the line. Spink said if we established lineage pressure and enough naming inconsistency, they'd negotiate before litigating. Nobody was getting hurt. You would have still had plenty. Nobody moved. Then he made the mistake that finished him. He looked at Renee and said, Tell them I said we only needed the old signatures and the church records to make the file believable. Some people confess because they are cornered. Others confess because in the panic of being cornered, they still believe they can manage the room. Renee's face collapsed before her body did. She sat back down like her knees had forgotten their job. Bernice covered her mouth with both hands. Pastor shut his eyes for 1 second, opened them, and looked 20 years older. I spoke softly. So the issue was never family. Ray's nostrils flared. Family was the access point. There it was. Not elegant, not deniable, not reversible. Pastor turned toward the audio console near the wall, where stewardship meetings had been routinely recorded since the previous year for absent trustees and minutes accuracy. Brother Jenkins, he called to the sound volunteer, who had been sitting near the side doors taking notes. Is this session being captured? It is, Pastor. Ray spun toward the back of the room. Too late. He looked at me then, and what sat in his face wasn't fear yet. It was offense. Genuine offense that the world had refused to honor the sophistication of his theft. That kind of arrogance always amazes me. "You set this up," he said. I set the truth where witnesses could see it. He stepped around the table. One finger pointed toward me. "You think you're clean because you did well. You think your branch got there alone. There were women keeping quiet for men like your father. There were names shifted in kitchens before you were born. You want purity from broken history. That's a child's fantasy." My voice dropped with his. "No, I want you to stop using broken history as a crowbar." He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him room this time. Layers had done their work. The last piece needed landing. I nodded once toward the side office door. It opened, and Taryn stepped in with Micah's small navy blazer folded over her arm, like she had come from somewhere more important than this room. She had chosen not to bring the boy inside, thank God. Some truths do not need children watching them stand up. Ray went pale in a way I had not thought possible for a man so practiced. Pastor looked at her. "Sister Bell." Taryn held out a signed statement to Alicia, then to Pastor. "I would like this entered with the meeting materials." I personally observed Raymond Bell maintain a locked blue file box in the basement containing documents bearing Isaiah Monroe Carter's name, copies of identification materials, church records, and planning papers regarding property claims. I also heard him tell my son that Isaiah had changed his name and that some things needed fixing on paper. Ray barked her name as if volume could put her back in the kitchen of his control. She did not flinch. "I am finished protecting lies that train children to repeat them," she said. That line moved through the room like wind under a door. Renee started crying then. Quiet at first. More out of collapse than remorse. I have lived long enough to know those are not the same thing. Ray turned from Taryn to Pastor to me and finally arrived at threat, right on schedule. "If this goes beyond this room," he said, "I will bring every family rumor I know into public filings. Every affair. Every off-book transfer. Every secret burial debt. This church will drown in scandal before I let you paint me alone." Pastor's face changed at that. Not panic. Clarity. "Brother Bell," he said, "nobody made you forge your stewardship into predation." Ray tried to talk over him. Pastor raised one hand, and the whole room obeyed that hand except Ray. I spoke before he could restart. "You didn't uncover family. You hunted weakness and called it heritage." He stared at me. That was the only line that needed to remain standing after everything else sat down. For the first time since this began, he had no ready expression. Not polished indignation. Not wounded service. Not amused to superiority. Just a tired old hunger with nowhere to hide. If you've ever seen a manipulator lose control of the story in real time, then you know the strange quiet that follows. It is not triumph. It is the sound of pretending running out of oxygen. Put that in the comments if you've lived long enough to hear it. Some of y'all know exactly what I mean. Pastor asked everyone not essential to remain seated while he and two trustees conferred with Alicia in the corner. Nobody left. Not one person. There are moments a community senses it is looking at a wound that was trying to pass as architecture. Renee kept weeping into a tissue she had found in her purse. At one point, she looked up at me and whispered, "I never thought it would go this far." I believed her. I also knew that sentence had buried more elders than any obituary ever could. "It goes that far the moment you sign your name to a lie," I said. Taryn sat near the back with both hands folded, spine straight, exhaustion giving way to something that looked almost like relief. Harold walked over and placed a cup of water in front of her without saying a word. Small gestures tell you who men are. After 15 minutes, Pastor returned to the head of the table with Alicia beside him and one of the trustees. Deaconess Lorraine Wheeler on his right. He spoke slowly so every word had somewhere to land. Effective immediately, Raymond Bell is suspended from all financial, administrative, and leadership responsibilities pending full internal review and referral to appropriate authorities. Renee Carter James is likewise suspended from all church-related records access and committee duties. The church will preserve all recordings, logs, and relevant documents. Council will assist in notifying necessary parties. We will not bury this under confusion, no one argued. Not because everyone suddenly became brave, because paper had made bravery cheaper. Ray looked around the room as though somebody might still rescue him with institutional fatigue. That has saved a lot of bad men. Just not that morning. Then he did one more predictable thing. He reached for performance. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, and said, "I have given this church years of labor. You all think you're too pure to understand difficult stewardship. Fine. Enjoy your righteousness while the city keeps swallowing what our families failed to protect." Elisha answered before I could. There's a difference between recovering neglected property and fabricating kinship to seize it. Pastor pointed toward the doorway. "Brother Bell, you need to leave." Ray looked at me one last time, expecting maybe anger, maybe gloating, maybe the kind of hatred he could still use to flatter himself. What I felt was sadder than that. He had spent years building his standing in a place where people prayed together, buried parents together, sent kids to college together, and trusted each other with the soft parts of aging. And for what? To become a scavenger in a good suit. He left without another word. Renee tried to follow, then stopped 2 steps from the door and turned back to me. "Isaiah." I waited. "I was drowning," she said. And he kept talking like the paper was just sitting there for anybody with nerve. I believe that too. Predators rarely recruit with villain speeches. They recruit by finding the ache a person is ashamed of and dressing theft up as overdue balance. "You should have asked for help," I said. She nodded once, crying harder now because sometimes the plainest sentence cuts deepest. Then she walked out. By noon, the first practical consequences had already started moving. Alicia filed notice with the court that afternoon and attached enough documentary contradiction to make the petition unstable on site. Pastor authorized immediate preservation of all church record systems and requested an outside audit of file access. Bernice sat through that process looking wounded but cooperative. And nobody treated her like the villain because error under trust is not the same thing as exploitation through trust. Taryn went with her son to stay with her sister in Owings Mills for a while. Pastor arranged quiet support through the church benevolence team without turning her pain into a prayer request spectacle. I respected him for that. Some people think compassion only counts if it has an audience. They are wrong. 2 days later, Spinks filed a motion to withdraw. That told me more than a denial would have. Within a week, the court petition on Monroe Street had effectively collapsed. Alicia's filing raised enough fraud concerns that nobody was eager to touch Ray's theory with borrowed hands. The city office handling the old compensation fund froze every related inquiry and requested verified lineage review from actual estate counsel. Real names. Real records. Real chain. That is one thing liars hate. Precision. The police interest came later, and I will be careful with how I say that because some matters were still finding their shape when I finally sat down to tell this story. But I can say this much. Once investigators started comparing church access logs, copied identifiers, and prior property patterns connected to Ray and Spinks, my family's house stopped looking like an isolated misunderstanding. It looked like one stop on a longer route. Natural consequences do a cleaner job than revenge ever could. I did not call reporters. I did not parade through church with a victory face. I did not even attend the first Sunday after the meeting. I stayed home, made coffee, and let my body understand that the emergency had passed before I asked it for normalcy. Adrienne came by that afternoon with Miles and a tray of baked macaroni. She knew I wasn't going to cook for myself. She stood at my kitchen island with one hand on her hip and listened while I told the whole thing from beginning to end. When I finished, she walked around the counter and hugged me the way grown daughters do when they realize their father has been carrying more weight than posture revealed. Miles looked up from his juice box and asked, "So Church had a bad guy?" I smiled tiredly. Church had a man making bad choices. He considered that like it might show up on a spelling test later. "Did you win?" he asked. Children ask clean questions. Adults spend years muddying. I looked at him, then at the window over the sink where the magnolia had started blooming again despite itself. I protected what was ours, I said. That answer satisfied him. It satisfied me too. Aunt Odessa called that evening and said, "I heard the wolves had to walk back into the woods hungry." "News moves fast," I told her. "Baby, in our family, shame and pie recipes travel at the same speed." That made me laugh harder than I had all week. You need those moments, not because they erase the damage, because they remind you your life still contains rooms the damage never owned. The hardest part came the following Thursday when Renee called asking if she could see me. I almost said no, not because I feared her, because I didn't know which version of mercy the situation called for. We met on the front porch of my house just before dusk. I kept the screen door cracked behind me without planning to. Old instincts. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, spiritually, like greed had promised enlargement and delivered erosion. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said before sitting down. "Good," I answered. "Expect honesty," she nodded. Ray had found her when bills were stacking. Her son's student loans had gone delinquent, and the funeral home had cut her hours. He fed her a story about hidden family value, about correcting the historical record, about how wealthy branches always control narrative, while tired branches get left moralizing over scraps. At first, she believed they were only pursuing money nobody was actively using. Then the paper thickened. IDs, church files, photo access. She saw the line too late and kept walking because turning around would have required admitting what she had become part of. That is another ugly truth people don't say enough. Once shame buys its first acre in your mind, people will keep paying on land they hate, just to avoid admitting they live there. "I thought maybe you wouldn't really be harmed," she said. "I was harmed the moment you made me strange to my own dead." She covered her face and cried. I let her. Compassion is not interruption. When she could finally speak again, she asked whether I would tell her son everything. I said no. Not because I wanted to protect her image, but because children deserve age-appropriate truth, not adult debris dumped at their feet. She nodded like a woman grateful not to be treated worse than she had treated others. I did not absolve her. I did tell her one thing before she left. You can still stop becoming the person he trained you to be. That was the most mercy I had in me. As for Taryn, she sent me a handwritten card 3 weeks later. No flourishes, no over-explaining. Just this. "Thank you for making the lie stop where my son could see it stop." Some notes belong in drawers. That one belongs in a Bible. Church shifted after that, not overnight. Wounds that involve trust never close neat. There were special meetings, hard conversations, quiet embarrassments. Some members wanted to pretend Ray had simply made an error in judgment because naming evil too directly makes polite people itch. Others had the integrity to call things what they were. Pastor Givens chose honesty, and that saved more than his reputation. It saved the possibility of institutional repentance, which is rarer than folks think. Bernice retired 2 months later by her own choice. On her last day, I brought her butterscotch candies and flowers for her dining table. She held my hand at the office door and said, "I keep replaying where I should have known. Trust isn't stupidity," I told her. "It's only dangerous when the wrong person studies it." She cried then, and so did I a little, though I kept mine civilized. The Monroe Street property stayed in the family. More than that, I finally did what I should have done years earlier. I cleaned the estate chain fully, retitled where needed, recorded what had lived too long in memory, built a proper archive, locked the law around what love had left loose. There is nothing romantic about unfinished paperwork. People confuse sentiment with stewardship all the time. They are not the same. If you own something that matters, write it right. Name it right. Protect the elders before the scavengers start asking friendly questions. That is not paranoia. That is respect. One Saturday morning, Adrienne came over with file folders and colored tabs, and the two of us spent 4 hours turning my dining room into a command center. Miles labeled envelopes in the kind of giant crooked handwriting only children can produce. Family photos got digitized. Deeds got copied. Obituaries got matched to probate notes. And Odessa joined on speakerphone and corrected dates from memory better than any database. By the end of the day, the whole line felt less vulnerable. Still human, still imperfect, but not loose. That kind of repair doesn't make headlines. It does make sleep easier. The first Sunday I went back to New Salem after all of it, I parked in my usual spot and sat in the car a full minute before getting out. The building looked the same. Red brick, white trim, familiar doors. But I had changed in that ordinary way pain changes a man, not by making him dramatic, just more exact. Inside, people greeted me softly, too softly at first, like I might shatter if they used their normal voice. I spared them all by smiling first. After service, I felt a small hand slip into mine. Micah. He looked up at me with that same serious little face and said, "My mama told me your name was always your name." She was right, I said. He thought about that. I didn't mean to mess anything up. I bent a little so we were eye level. "Son, truth doesn't get messed up when it's spoken. It gets uncovered." He nodded as if filing that away for later use and ran back to Taryn, who stood near the fellowship hall doorway, looking lighter than the first day I saw her. Not happy exactly, but no longer dimmed. That meant something. A few weeks after that, Pastor asked if I would help build a real legacy protection workshop for the church. Not spectacle, not fear, just education, basic estate planning, beneficiary review, deed literacy, digital record safety. Enough to keep decent people from losing things to polished thieves. I said yes on one condition: no vanity, no turning caution into performance. Just useful truth, he agreed. And sitting here now, telling you this, I can say something I did not know in that parking lot on the first day. Exposure is only half the work. The other half is building conditions where the same lie has a harder time being born again. One late afternoon after one of those workshops, I came home tired in the clean way. Not depleted, used well. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my collar, and made coffee even though the hour leaned more toward iced tea. Deborah used to say my relationship with coffee bordered on liturgical. She wasn't wrong. I took the mug out to the back porch and sat where I could see both magnolia trees. The air was warm, not hot. Somebody down the block was grilling. A radio played old Anita Baker faint enough to feel like memory instead of soundtrack. For the first time in a long while, the silence around me wasn't asking questions. It was just silence. And before I close this out, I want to thank those of you who stay with stories like this all the way through. These layers, these records, these truths that don't come easy, they take time to tell right. If you ever choose to support this channel, the link is in the description and in the comments. And if support isn't in the cards, your time here still matters to me. It always will. What stayed with me most was not Ray's face when the room turned on him. It was my grandson asking whether I had won. Age changes what that word means. At 25, maybe winning looks like crushing the man who tried you. At 62, winning looks quieter. Clear title, clean records. A child no longer repeating a lie. A church forced to tell itself the truth. Coffee on your own porch without needing to recheck the locks. That is enough for me. If you've been carrying a suspicion that something in your family, your records, or your peace isn't sitting right, don't bully yourself into silence just because the source is familiar. Familiarity is not innocence. Pay attention. Ask the extra question. Pull the one file everyone hopes you'll ignore. And if you want to keep walking with me through stories where truth has to be uncovered one layer at a time, subscribe and come back next week. That Sunday at church started with a little boy asking me why I changed my name. It ended, eventually, with me sitting under the evening light, hearing my own name settle back into my house exactly where it belonged.